After seizing the divine son's fortune, he was besieged and died. 1,000 years later, the tide of beasts receded, amidst the mountains of corpses and the sea of blood, under the starry sky, a girl opened her eyes. Keywords of the novel. The sword Immortal killed back without a pop-up window, the sword Immortal killed back with a complete TXT download, the sword Immortal killed back with the latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Wedge. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Wedge. From an orphan girl to the leader of sword cultivation in the immortal world, Su Jianqing has walked this path for a whole of 3,000 years, but only 3,000 years. 16 years into the Tao, 20 years into the foundation, 30 years into the elixir. 100-year-old immortal, 1,000-year-old golden immortal. Her speed along the way, with average qualifications, is truly astonishing. It is said that she is a person who embodies great fortune, even she herself thinks so. Only when the calamity of the heavens is approaching, can there be those who possess great fortune to cope with it. Su Jianqing always thought he was the one who should be robbed. So, for these 3,000 years, since she embarked on the path of the Tao, she has always been steadfast in guarding the Tao, eliminating demons and defending the Tao, and taking it as her own responsibility to protect all the people in the world. But in the end, she was also the thief who was locked in the immortal punishment formation and treated as stealing the fortune of the divine son. So, was it herself who caused the disaster that day? I really look up to her. She lowered her eyelashes, covering the hint of sarcasm beneath her eyes. Swordsmanship flew past fiercely, and Su Jianqing felt a chill in his forehead. Soon, the collected blood droplets flowed through his eyebrows and slid down his eye sockets, blooming one brilliant blood flower after another on the ground. That blood flower is not pure blood red, and there is still a faint golden light shining in the bright red. This golden blood is also the ironclad evidence that nailed down her guilt. Countless immortals stand on the clouds outside the Zhu Xian formation. Among them were faces familiar to Su Jianqing, but those ordinary faces with a kind smile were either solemn or frowning at the moment, with some angry eyes wide open, as if they were disdainful of her behavior. Su Jianqing chuckled softly. The red-clothed fairy standing closest outside the formation seemed to hear this smile and immediately took a step forward to angrily rebuke, "Dugu Guang, don't you still repent? Hurry up and return the chi you took away, otherwise the divine souls under this immortal slaying formation will disappear, and you won't even have an afterlife." Solitary Light. Su Jianqing was stunned for a moment before realizing that Solitary Light was her Taoist name. Why is there a moment of unfamiliarity with a Taoist name that has been called by people all along? This question flashed through Su Jianqing's heart, and soon the pain caused by the weakening of the divine soul with the sword energy made her abandon these and no longer think much. How can I repay it? Su Jianqing asked in a low voice, his voice somewhat shattered. The wind blew and it dissipated, but the immortals were all ears and eyes, so how could they miss it? The fairy in red thought she had hope upon seeing this, and exclaimed with joy, "Swear to heaven that you will return your non-self energy to Brother Chanya." Long night. Is it a godson? Su Jianqing raised his eyes and, through a misty red, crossed over the female fairy in red. His gaze finally fell on the tall and slender male fairy outside the formation, who had never uttered a word from beginning to end. The male immortal was dressed in white, with a jade crown tied around his hair, revealing a jade face. He was full of vitality and handsome, with black eyes like an ancient well without waves. His expression was indifferent, as if nothing was in his eyes. He looked like a towering deity. Is that the divine son? For some unknown reason, a blurry and quietly emerged from the deepest part of her memory. The appearance of the young man was so blurred that it was difficult to distinguish, but Su Jianqing could still vaguely remember the cold mist and clear cedar-like scent on his body, as well as the warm sound of flowing water. If given the opportunity, I want to live well and take a walk outside to see the mountains and rivers, but I don't have time. But unlike you, you still have plenty of time, so live well. At that time, it was already deep winter, and the branches in the courtyard were bare. From the window, the sky looked grey. It was just a year since the boy picked it up in the cold and snowy night. That was her last conversation with the boy. She knelt by the young man's bed, unsure of the future, hoping that he would recover soon, but also afraid of his death. The young man had been sick for a long time and couldn't eat anything for 2 or 3 days. Suddenly, he gained strength and sat half leaning on a cushion, looking at the sky outside the window and talking to her. They all say that the young man is critically ill, and every breath of his bones and flesh feels as if they have been crushed and healed, which must be extremely painful. Because his face became increasingly pale when he fell asleep, and he often gritted his teeth in dreams, with fine sweat oozing from his forehead. But every time he wakes up, he smiles and says, as if those pains are just nightmares, and once he wakes up, they disappear. On that day, the boy woke up from his usual slumber. It was different from any previous day, his eyebrows and eyes were relaxed, and he seemed to be bathed in light, with a layer of gold plating on his entire body. "I'm leaving soon, it's finally over," the young man said with a contented expression. He looked at her with a clear gaze, as if there was a sky curtain in his eyes, running the entire world with infinite tolerance. Her lips moved and she couldn't say anything to keep him. After a moment of silence, she said, "It's okay." She lowered her head and tightly pursed her lips, desperately suppressing the tears in her eyes. Suddenly, a cold, not too broad palm gently placed on her head. She suddenly looked up and bumped into the clear gaze of the young man, whose black eyes were clearly imprinted with her reflection, as if holding the sky curtain, running the entire world, infinite tolerance. The young man let out a sigh and said, "They all say I am a reincarnation of a divine child, but unfortunately my destiny is too precious for a mortal body to hold back, and I have no spiritual roots to cultivate immortality. This is why I have this calamity. Although I have been trapped in this body for a lifetime, I have still encountered many meaningful landscapes, which is not in vain." Her tears couldn't help but fall down like broken beads. The young man's cold fingertips caressed the corner of her eyes and whispered, "Don't cry, I'm free now, you should be happy for me." "Okay," she choked up and responded to his words, "You're free, I'm happy for you." Eyeing, the young man gently put down his hand and called out to her. "I'm here. When I leave, you can go cultivate immortality." Tian Hengzi said you have spiritual roots. She was a bit embarrassed and bit her lip, still responding to him, "Okay, I'll go cultivate immortality, but my aptitude is not good, so I may be a bit slow to cultivate." The young man laughed and his eyes relaxed, saying, "It's okay, if you're a bit slow, then you're a bit slow. With the cultivation of immortality and the ability, you can go to more places to see. If possible, I'm willing to give you my divine luck, so that you can stand higher and see more scenery. I will work hard." Tears had already blurred her eyes, and she couldn't see anything clearly. "This world is so beautiful, take a look for me more." That was the last sentence spoken by the young man. He hung softly, his eyes still gazing at the grey-white sky outside the window. Thus, his life was forever frozen in that moment. So, she really went to cultivate immortality later on, maybe she really got the luck he gave her, and after that, everything went smoothly and the journey was vast. That person, although young and had only been with her for a short period of time, made people feel that only such a person deserves the title of God's son. If there is a God in this world, it must be like him. His eyes carry all things, contain all things, and it is impossible to be so aloof as if all living beings are not satisfied. The suppression of tens of thousands of sword chi made her know that she couldn't walk out of the immortal killing formation alive. The person who gave her the chi was willing to return it to its rightful owner, but she didn't want to be forced to give it to an unknown cat or dog. Counterfeit goods are counterfeit goods. No matter how much you brag, as long as you see the real one, you will never take a second look at the fake one. Su Jianqing couldn't hold on for too long. Her body was completely stained with blood, and her red to black robe accentuated her face, which had become particularly pale due to excessive blood loss. The woman in red impatiently urged, "What are you still delaying? Would you rather die than return your luck? It's natural to pay it back." Su Jianqing stood up with strong support, wiped a trace of blood on her body with both hands and fingers, and swore to the heavenly Tao, "Heaven and earth are evidence, and I am willing to use this body's divine soul as an oath to bring this body's energy." She paused for a moment and looked at the red-clothed fairy waiting for the next message, as well as the male fairy behind her who tried hard to endure but still couldn't bear the urgent gaze. She curled her lips and smiled, and asked with some emotion, "What is it called?" "Long night," exclaimed the fairy in red. "Oh," Su Jianqing nodded, lowered his eyes, and said gently, "I wish to return this body energy to the person who gave it to me back then. May he be healthy and have everything he wishes for every year." The words fell to the ground, and a golden light rose up into the sky, breaking through the immortal killing formation and charging towards the distant unknown sky. Su Jianqing made a vow at the cost of his divine soul, which was agreed upon by the heavenly Tao. How could it be? Impossible. Where is Guguang? How could she be? After the golden light dissipated, the female fairy in red looked at the empty array of killing immortals and let out unbelievable screams. Please support the new book. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Wake up. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Wake up. The bleak autumn wind falls with the last hint of afterglow, taking away the last bit of warmth. Outside the deserted city, just as the tide of beasts had passed, a young girl suddenly opened her eyes at the foot of a small mountain where the bodies of monster beasts were piled up. Headache, countless images seemed like gushing springs, filling her sea of consciousness. That is a fragment of memory, long and distant. There are too many, as if to burst the sea of consciousness. The girl gritted her teeth tightly, suppressing the intense pain. Her open eyes protruded slightly due to the pain, covered in bloodstains. After an unknown amount of time, the girl exhausted her last bit of strength and reluctantly closed her eyes. Consciousness falls into darkness. The sky gradually darkened, and bright stars hung on the black screen. On the battlefield after the tide of monsters receded, only the autumn wind blew with a mournful sound, as if singing an endless elegy for so many lost lives. What sound was enveloped in the wind and scattered towards the empty surroundings? What sound is that? Listen carefully. It was the call of a young girl. Su Jianqing, Su Jianqing, Su Jianqing. The voice called out a name. Called for a long time, but no one responded. Su Jianqing. A little girl with a size of about 11 and 12 was carrying a wind lamp, panting as she flipped through the body, calling out Su Jianqing's name. Her forehead was already sweating profusely, and her back was already soaked. Her hands were trembling, but she still refused to give up. Forget it, Ayu, don't look for it. The monster wave this time is too fierce. Even if we barely survive, it will definitely be a serious injury. I don't know how many more days we can live. Your friend hasn't returned yet, probably gone. The uncle who came out with him advised. Ayu shook her head and said with red eyes, "She won't be fine. She's a cultivator." What is a cultivator? The uncle didn't take it seriously. The capable cultivators are staying in the fairy mountain, and those who can come to the wasteland city. TSK. The uncle only spoke halfway, but the meaning was already very clear. No, she's different from others, Ayu said stubbornly. People say that disasters leave 1,000 years behind. She said she's a disaster, and she definitely won't die so easily. Seeing the little girl's stubbornness, the uncle no longer advised her. He was also familiar with the Su family sisters. 2 years ago, Su Jianqing, who had just come to the desert city, saved the orphan Au from the monster. After that, the two people became dependent on each other. Su Jianqing raised Au as his sister. 2 years is not long, but with the grace of saving lives and nurturing, no wonder Ayu is so stubborn. Uncle sighed and instructed Ayu to be careful on her own. If she finds someone, she will be called him. Although he also received money from Ayu on this trip, it was only a passing payment. He is a treasure picker, a profession unique to the deserted city. Whenever the tide of monsters outside the city recedes, it is the day they come out to work. So many monster corpses are all treasures. Monster pills, monster skins, horns, and even the organs of some monsters are all high-quality materials for refining and alchemy. Many people come to pick them up, and if we could pick up a few more storage bags. Not only for a year of income, but also for the entire family's relocation expenses. There is no one in this deserted city who doesn't want to leave. The uncle let out a sigh, put away his wild thoughts, and hurried to the side. Ayu reached out and wiped away her tears, continuing to look forward. Although I don't admit my uncle's words, my heart is heavy. As I continue to shout my name, my voice is a bit floating. I don't know how many monster corpses I have flipped through, and Ayu no longer calls out, only silently flipping open one after another of the monster corpses. Just as she numbly pushed away a small mountain made up of several monster beasts, her familiar face suddenly appeared in front of her. Ayu exclaimed, took a step back, and sat on the ground with her legs limp. She paused for a while before calming down slightly, picked up the scattered wind lamps on the side, and stumbled closer to carefully examine them. It's really Su Jianqing. She has been looking for Su Jianqing for a long time. Su Jianqing closed his eyes, frowned slightly, and his expression was not peaceful. Even under the dim yellow light, one cannot see their face. Her shoulder blades were still buried beneath her, and she couldn't see anything, but Ayu remembered that she was wearing a moon-white dress when she left, but now she can't see the original color at all. Ayu dare not think whether it is dirty or something else. She trembled and extended her index finger under Su Jianqing's nose, wanting to see if she was still breathing. At that moment, Su Jianqing opened his eyes. Ah! The scream echoed through the sky, instantly breaking the tranquility in the darkness. Uncle Picking Treasure immediately rushed over upon hearing the commotion, but saw Ayu lying on the ground with a panicked expression. Ayu, what's going on? Ayu trembled her lips and reached out to point to the location of Su Jianqing, unable to hold back a word for a long time. Uncle looked at the pile of monster corpses, then at Ayu, and decided to carry a lamp to take a look. The light happened to fall on Su Jianqing's face. Uncle immediately met Su Jianqing's gaze. Oh, my mother. Uncle Picking Treasure was also startled and almost threw the lamp. Fortunately, he was brave enough to take an extra look and blink when he saw Su Jianqing. Live. Uncle calmed down and said to Xiaoya, your friend is lucky and still alive. Don't be fooled. Since you have found someone, quickly dig her out and see where the injury is. If it's not serious, I'll help you carry her back. Uncle's words finally calmed Ayu from her fear. Seeing that Uncle was already pulling the body of the demon beast pressing on Su Jianqing's body, she quickly rushed forward to help. Soon, Su Jianqing was pulled out intact. Her chest relaxed as she was unable to speak due to breathing obstruction, and she finally gained liberation. Su Jianqing opened his mouth and wanted to speak, but was interrupted by Ayu, let me show you if you've been hurt. After confirming that Su Jianqing had only suffered minor injuries and was not in any serious condition, Ayu could no longer resist the worries and fears that had been held back for a whole day, and plunged her head into Su Jianqing's arms, crying loudly. Su Jianqing gathered some strength and raised his hand to touch the little girl's furry head. He chuckled softly and said, be good, don't cry, it's so ugly. Ayu took a sniff and cried even louder. Su Jianqing. Uncle Picking Treasure couldn't bear to see it anymore and spoke up, Miss Su, please don't tease Ayu. This child has been worried all day. I'm sorry, it's my fault, Su Jianqing said with a stern expression. Uncle picking treasures is not good to talk about, I only suggest sending them back to the city earlier. Su Jianqing politely declined, only saying that he was temporarily suppressed and powerless, and that they would return on their own later. Uncle picking treasure was also happy and relaxed, so he quickly said goodbye and left. As he walked away, Yu, who was sobbing, suddenly raised her face from Su Jianqing's arms and glared angrily at her. You didn't ask him to take you back, didn't I spend the money in vain? Ah, how dare you be willing to spend money for me? Su Jianqing looked surprised, but when he looked at Yu's eyes that were already on the verge of anger, he immediately surrendered. Okay, my fault, I told you to spend money for nothing. It's okay, we'll earn it ourselves later. How do I earn it? Yu asked sincerely with a pair of confused eyes. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Treasure Picking. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Treasure Picking. How to earn it. Of course, I also made a profit by picking up treasures. She fought hard in the tide of monsters, and now is naturally the time to harvest the fruits of victory. Su Jianqing drank some water and took out a grain of pai gu dan from his qiankuan bag to eat, gradually regaining his lost strength. She stood up and touched her waist, but unexpectedly felt empty. Then I remembered that my sword had been lost in the previous monster tide. Okay, we need to find a handy tool first. Su Jianqing looked around and his gaze fell on a nearby point. He quickly made a decision and strode over. Yu also followed Su Jianqing with a light step, feeling extremely nervous. With support, all the courage she had when she came out to find someone disappeared. Su Jianqing stood in front of the corpse of a demon beast that had fallen and had one person standing tall, with two protruding huge teeth growing at the corners of its mouth. That giant tooth is about a foot long, very hard, slightly curved in shape, thin and sharp on both sides, resembling two small swords, so this monster is also called a double-sword giant-toothed beast. With skillful force, the two sword teeth were pulled out. The root of the teeth was a smooth cylindrical shape, slightly thin, and exactly the natural handle of the sword. Su Jianqing held it in his hand and slightly weighed it, feeling that it was okay. In the current situation, there is really no more convenient tool than this. Yu was somewhat worried, can this work? Su Jianqing blinked and said, just watch. An hour later, the two of them walked back with their packed qiankuan bags. Walking to the city gate, Su Jianqing stopped and looked up at the towering city wall in front of him. There are mottled marks on the city wall, varying in depth, left by waves of monsters, but no one has delved into whether those marks belong to monsters or humans. The Wasteland City is just another name for this city nowadays. In fact, many years ago, it had a beautiful name called Linxian City. At that time, the city was bustling with activity, and occasionally immortals transformed into mortals to tour the city, leaving behind mysterious legends. I don't know when that bustling hustle and bustle has dissipated, and the repeated outbreaks of monster waves have gradually blocked the road from this city to the outside world. As years passed, the number of people in the city decreased. The remaining ones today are not those who are destitute and have nowhere else to go, or those who lick their blood to earn some desperate wealth, and there are also those disciples from the Immortal sect who have been sent out to guard the deserted city for their merits. Su Jianqing is the third type of person. Su Jianqing is an outsider disciple of the current Xianmen Great Holy Yuan sect. Koluan Ling Zhen is a useless Wulingan that even external disciples would despise. However, she was reluctantly accepted into the sect as an external disciple only because she was influenced by the fact that her biological father was an elder of the sect. But even if it's garbage, it feels like her existence is a sin. Her biological father treated her as non-existent, but his current wife and children still cannot tolerate her. So, from opening her eyes to closing them every day, countless tasks and coursework overwhelmed her. Even so, it's still not enough. As long as a person is in the sect, even if she doesn't stand out among the tens of thousands of external disciples, she still needs to find a reason to send her to the wasteland city. Only when she's out of sight can her heart become restless. From the immortal gate to the remote and desolate city, when asked about Su Jianqing's thoughts, Su Jianqing may only say one thing. There is no gap. Not only is there no gap, but the living environment is also much better than before. Except for dealing with 1 or 2 monster surges a year, the rest of the time is considered free. Su Jianqing also thought it would be good to live a lifetime like this. When she was in the sect, she was always burdened with a lot of external affairs and didn't have much time to attend classes, which led to her only introducing qi into her body and entering the first layer of qi cultivation without learning anything. Let nature take its course and let yourself go. Su Jianqing has always told himself this. But when she was surrounded by a wave of demon beasts, blood-stained with her long sword, exhausted, and finally heavily weighed down by the fallen corpse of the demon beast, she heard the sound of her bones shattering, the immense pain, and the rapid loss of temperature telling her that she was about to die. She is unwilling to accept it. On the brink of death, the constantly suppressed unwillingness and anger turned into flames, rising from the bottom of her heart and instantly enveloping her entire heart and body, burning her soul. Why? She asked herself, why did she want this to end her life? She is not the body of sin, she is a witness to sin. Why is it that she, as a victim, licks blood here to survive, while the perpetrator sits high in the sendai, pretending to be a pitiless and joyless immortal? The anger of unwillingness and unwillingness to transform seemed to burn her whole body, and she thought she was going to die silently in the tide of monsters. But I didn't want to be blessed by misfortune, to break free from any shackles, and gain memories that belonged to my past life. In the previous life, she was such a powerful person, no, a powerful immortal. Although she was ultimately wrongly killed, it's okay. What she remembers is not only hatred, but also the martial arts experience from her previous life. It would be impolite to keep a 2-life grudge for the next life. In this life, she will definitely go back and seek revenge. Su Jianqing's eyes flickered with determination. Sister Xing, why aren't you leaving? Ayu asked curiously when she saw Su Jianqing standing still for so long. The city gate was close in front of her, and the full harvest made her forget the fear and unease she had when she walked out before, revealing her lively personality. It's nothing, let's go back. Su Jianqing regained his senses and extended a hand to Ayu. Ayu didn't hesitate and handed her little hand over. Holding hands, I leisurely walked into the city under the first halo of morning. Until she entered the house, Ayu still felt her little head dizzy. After washing her face, she realized she was more awake and ran to ask Su Jianqing, Sister Xing, why did you suddenly become so powerful? Previously, when he was outside the city, the giant teeth used as a temporary sword were enchanted in Su Jianqing's hands, like arms and fingers. Several sword lights flashed by, and even the most complete monster was cut off in an instant, neatly classified and falling to the ground. This incredible skill is something that Ayu has never seen before. This is what true cultivators in Ayu's mind can achieve. It was also the first time in 2 years that Su Jianqing had shown such great abilities in front of her. This girl, if you have something to ask for, it's Star Sister. If she gets angry, it's Su Jianqing. Su Jianqing pinched her meaty little face and asked her, do you want to learn? Ayu blinked and said loudly, I want to. Then go rest quickly and get enough sleep before we talk. Feeling scared and almost sleepless all night, the little girl's black and blue eyes may not even be covered by half a pound of powder. Really? Teach me when I'm fully asleep. Ayu's eyes were filled with suspicion as she chased after her, seeking a definite answer. Su Jianqing chuckled and said, yes, I'll teach you when you're fully asleep. Ayu has pity on Star Sister, she's also very tired. Okay, Ayu couldn't bear to part, but when it came to sleeping, she unconsciously covered her mouth and yawned, but still insisted on hooking up with Su Jianqing. I don't know why my reputation is so bad in this little girl's heart. Su Jianqing hooked up with her and easily coaxed her to sleep. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Promotion. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Promotion for Cultivators. Cultivation has no time. Su Jianqing's eyes closed and opened, and half a day had already passed. The sun was hanging high outside the window, and she was not surprised to smell the stench emanating from herself. That is the smell emitted by the self-dirt discharged from washing the marrow and pulse. Fortunately, she had foresight and did not change into the clothes she had soaked in the monster tide before practicing. Now, she has wasted one less set, but the smell is a bit strong. Taking off her dirty clothes, Su Jianqing directly needed a dust removal formula for herself. The spiritual light flowed through her fingertips and quickly transformed into a spiritual net covering her entire body, enveloping the dirt and dissipating it into the air. Not even using boiling water for bathing, the whole person has been completely refreshed. Su Jianqing nodded in satisfaction. In half a day, I stepped directly into the foundation building from the first level of Qi cultivation. In Su Jianqing's opinion, although she is still weak, she is still capable of using some simple techniques without being too radical. This speed can really be considered as fast, let alone her 5 spirit roots. Since ancient times, those who can cultivate immortals must possess spiritual seeds, also known as spiritual roots, but not everything with spiritual seeds can be cultivated. The spiritual roots belong to the 5 elements due to their different properties, most of which are not separated from metal, wood, water, fire, and soil. There are special examples such as wind, ice, thunder, etc., which are only derived from the variation of the 5 elements. The 5 elements complement each other, and having multiple spiritual roots can actually hinder one's cultivation. Since ancient times, when recruiting disciples from the Immortal Cultivation sect, it has been believed that having fewer spiritual roots is the better qualification. Conversely, having more spiritual roots leads to greater disdain. For example, the daughter born to Su Jianqing's scumbag father and his current wife is a single lineage water spirit root. Since birth, he has been nurtured by countless heavenly and earthly treasures by the sect since his spiritual roots were detected. At the age when he could enter the realm, he was even directly adopted as a disciple by elderly Feng. And Su Jianqing. She changed into a new outfit, casually took out the headband and tied up her long hair before pacing out of the room. Ayu is still sleeping in the neighboring room. Perhaps due to the previous shock, the small eyebrows occasionally curled up in their sleep, as if encountering difficulties. Su Jianqing raised his hand and gently brushed it, and a little spiritual light didn't hesitate to enter Ayu's eyebrows. Soon, her eyebrows and eyes relaxed. Seeing this, Su Jianqing also smiled along. Stepping out and looking at the sky, Su Jianqing knew that Xiao Ayu couldn't sleep for too long and would definitely wake up hungry in a while. So he went to the stove to cook. Flipped through the grain bucket, it was filled with ordinary rice and coarse grains, as well as a few handful of coarse noodles. The resources in the deserted city are scarce, and the land around the city is fertile. However, due to the constant influence of the demon beast tide, no one dares to cultivate it. Therefore, the ordinary grain that can be eaten is purchased by merchants in the city from elsewhere, and the price is naturally not low. Fortunately, there are few people in the city, so houses usually have a yard and a plot of land to grow vegetables for a while, which is enough for the whole family to eat. The piece of land in the yard has been well taken care of by Xiao Ayu, with big and watery cabbage and green beans hanging down from her belly. You can't just eat vegetables. Thinking back on Xiao Ayu's meaty little face, Su Jianqing lowered his head and flipped through the qiankun bag, pulling out a few pieces of monster meat to prepare for her body repair. Before switching, Su Jianqing never thought about using monster meat. Because although the monster meat is good and contains spiritual energy, it cannot be cooked with ordinary fire due to its quality, and it has an abnormal smell. To remove this odor and make it edible, it must be treated with a different heat. Su Jianqing smoothly entered the Tao based on the memories of his past life. Although he didn't have much spiritual energy, he may have done too many things. My cultivation level is low, but my realm and vision are both present. Some insights into the Tao are applicable at all times. Ordinary people's cultivation not only requires accumulating cultivation, but also exploring one realm and another. Often, crossing from one realm to another not only requires being struck by thunder, but also dealing with mental and demonic calamities after being struck, and then stabilizing the realm. In short, for cultivators, the process of advancement can take at least 3 to 5 years to complete. Not to mention the journey from introducing Qi into the body to ascending to Mahayana, there are 6 major realms and several minor realms that need to be experienced in the process, including Qi cultivation, foundation building, golden elixir, yuaning, spiritual transformation, and combination. The fundamental difference in elevating these realms is the perception of the world and the way of heaven. And for Su Jianqing, these obstacles are almost non-existent. In other words, for Su Jianqing, as long as his cultivation is reached, soaring in the daytime is not just a dream. But Su Jianqing is not so anxious. Revenge, of course, is to be avenged, but revenge is not everything for her. A small cluster of Dan fire rose from the palm of the hand, which was not enough to deal with those few pieces of monster meat. But Su Jianqing didn't panic at all. She closed her eyes and focused. Soon, the spiritual energy centered around her began to rotate, attracting the gathering of spiritual energy from further away places while blending into the Dan fire. Almost in an instant, the silk thread ignited and almost turned into a fireball. Su Jianqing raised his palm slightly, and the fireball obediently drifted towards the monster meat placed on the cutting board, wrapping it and burning the fat and protein in the meat to the fullest, emitting a sizzle, sizzle, oil explosion sound. It smells so good. Ayu rubbed her sleepy eyes and touched the stove all the way. When she saw that ball of Dan fire, she was so shocked that she opened her mouth and couldn't close it for half a day. Fire. It's on fire. Ayu pointed to the red flame and gestured to Su Jianqing with a stuttering gesture. Su Jianqing stood leisurely and smiled at her, but did not make any extra movements. Ayu realized the difference when she saw that the fire remained the same size as it was when she saw it, and did not burn other places. She looked at Su Jianqing and walked over, asking with surprise and curiosity, "Did you make this?" Su Jianqing rubbed her furry hair and responded, "Are you hungry? I'll have barbecue later." Upon hearing the meat being eaten, Ayu was extremely happy. She smelled the aroma of meat emanating from the air and swallowed several mouthfuls of saliva. She eagerly looked at the fire and was no longer afraid. After the meat was grilled and the rice was cooked, Ayu took the initiative to make a bowl of green vegetable soup and cooked it together. After the two finished their meal, Ayu touched her round belly and collapsed on the chair, feeling so comfortable that she almost didn't want to move. Su Jianqing couldn't stand her, so he gently tugged at her braid and said, "Go wash the dishes." Ayu pouted and didn't want to move. Su Jianqing said, "Washing dishes teaches you how to practice." Ayu immediately got up and picked up the dishes to wash. Quickly washing the dishes, Ayu bounced back and stood in front of Su Jianqing, looking at her eagerly. Su Jianqing naturally had no intention of breaking her promise. Just now, while Ayu was washing dishes, she had already touched 2 cattails in her qiankuan bag and placed them on the ground. She guided Ayu to sit on a futon and position herself with her 5 hearts facing the sky. "Close your eyes, relax, don't think about anything." As soon as Ayu closed her eyes and listened, she instinctively wanted to open them. A voice shouted, "Concentrate." She shrank and closed her eyes. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Air Extraction. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Air Extraction. At the beginning, her consciousness was all dark and hazy. Ayu was a bit confused and didn't know what else to do, but soon she felt enveloped by an invisible aura. Through that invisible aura, her perception gradually extended outward. The darkness gradually faded away, and the five senses also gradually disappeared. She felt her entire consciousness slowly rising under the support of that invisible aura. Do you see those colorful dots of light? A voice came, unable to distinguish between distance and size, but the meaning was extremely clear. What spot of light? Ayu's consciousness did not linger on the sound, and soon she followed it and looked around. I don't know if it was due to the sound, but soon she saw various spots of light gradually emerging around the misty surroundings. She counted carefully, including blue, red, yellow, white, and black. Now try summoning them and see who is willing to play with you. The voice came again, gently guiding Ayu to the next step. Ayu instinctively calls out those light spots from the bottom of her heart. At first, she called out for a long time, but the dots of light remained motionless, making her very anxious. At this moment, the voice comforted her, "Don't worry, you need to let them know that you like them, and they will respond to you." Ayu tried again, and this time it didn't take too long. A few nearby light spots responded to her, slowly leaning towards her and affectionately sticking stickers to her. At this moment, the other spots of light were still lazy, and Ayu didn't want to give up and continue to call. Hard work pays off for those who have a heart, and finally all the dots of light responded to Ayu and gathered closer to her. When all the dots of light gathered in one place, a sudden white light flashed, and Ayu felt that her whole body was slowly sinking again, finally landing in reality. She felt like she was sitting again. Now follow me and walk with those spiritual energy, you need to remember the route. Then, Ayu felt the invisible aura supporting her and the light dots surrounding her walking on one winding road after another. In the dark, she seemed to know that these paths all came from her own body. As she walked, the dots of light gradually dimmed and decreased, but every time she felt a cool and comfortable feeling coming from all over her body, until she finally arrived at a dark place where the dots fell into and disappeared. Ayu suddenly woke up, blinked, and met Su Jianqing's slightly smiling eyes. "I can't believe what I just experienced. How is it?" Su Jianqing asked. "Ayu. It's a bit." She thought carefully and said, "Mysterious." Su Jianqing nodded and said, "Not bad. Have you remembered the path of spiritual energy wandering just now? That will be the path for your future cultivation." Ayu finally understood. She tried to recall for a moment, thinking that such a complex path would be easy for her to forget. However, she didn't expect that once she had a thought, the path would come to her mind on its own. However, at this moment, there is no extra spiritual energy remaining in her meridians, so it cannot be demonstrated on the spot. Su Jianqing saw that she remembered it and said, "Then you can practice it yourself. I'll go out and do some things, and come back later." Ayu responded joyfully and even waved her hand eagerly to say goodbye. With Su Jianqing's guidance, she realized that practicing was such a fun thing, so she couldn't wait to try it on her own. The little girl has a heavy playful heart, which is normal. Su Jianqing looked at her for a while, then went straight to the Xianmeng garrison in the city center, preparing to purchase some equipment for Ayu. Although a deserted city is desolate, it is not an ownerless city. It belongs to the jurisdiction of the Immortal Alliance. And Xianmeng is a joint organization established by hundreds of sects of all sizes in Xianshan. Each sect dispatches some elders and disciples to take turns. The leader of the alliance is also appointed by the 10 immortals of the Immortal Mountain in rotation, with one change for each jiazi. The Immortal Alliance usually has no major affairs and cannot manage the affairs of each sect. However, due to its large and scattered organization, it is well informed. Some remote, spiritually scarce cities that each sect does not want to manage will eventually be under the name of the Immortal Alliance. Some disciples of each sect who make mistakes will also be sent to these places for service, with merit as compensation for punishment, such as Su Jianqing. The Xianmeng garrison is easy to find, and the largest building in the city center is Legend has it that it was the former lord's mansion of Xianlin City, with numerous houses and extremely luxurious and gorgeous construction. Even the stones used for paving the ground were made of high-quality warm white jade, and when walking barefoot up, the feet warmed up. Su Jianqing didn't expect so much when he stepped on the ground rumored to be paved with warm white jade. Skilled around a few rooms, the car stopped in front of a room with a exchange counter hanging at the door. There are already many people in the room, and the queue has been lined up 10 feet outside the door. At this moment, the disciples of various sects stationed in the deserted city have also brought their harvest, and it is not surprising that there are many people. Fortunately, the team's progress is not slow. Many people have storage bags with small capacity and simple items that can be easily distinguished at a glance. Disciples who go to exchange can choose to use the items they bring to offset their contribution points. Once the contribution points accumulate to a certain extent, they can be used to offset some of their service years. Alternatively, disciples can exchange supplies for spirit stones and elixirs. Many people rush out of the city to harvest the second wave after quickly exchanging items. Although there are many people picking up treasures outside, the process is time-consuming and laborious, far less easy than these disciples of the sect. This morning until Su Jianqing's return journey, Uncle picking treasures harvest was not even 1/10 of Su Jianqing's busy hour. Su Jianqing looked from a distance and didn't see anyone he knew, so he quietly walked to the end of the queue. It's her turn soon. The disciple of the Immortal Alliance, who was responsible for recording, stared at the head of the book without lifting his eyes. He pointed to the empty ground next to him and said, "Let's put down the things." Su Jianqing then untied the Qianquan bag from his waist and flipped it downwards. With a loud bang, there was a pile of small mountain-like things on the ground. The people around exclaimed in surprise. The disciple of the Immortal Alliance also raised his head in surprise and glanced at Su Jianqing. Seeing the Qianquan bag in her hand, which was more than 10 times larger than the storage bag, her gaze paused. She put down the book in her hand, flipped through it on the table, and pulled out a register to ask, "What name? Which sect?" "Su Jianqing, Saint Yuanzong." Su Jianqing replied calmly. She saw the clothes and robes of the inner disciples of the Holy Yuan sect on the disciple's body, and her heart surged with bad thoughts. Sure enough, the disciple closed the book with a snap and sneered, "So it's you." "It's me." Su Jianqing raised his eyebrows and said, "Is there a problem?" The disciple felt unhappy when he saw Su Jianqing so rebellious and said in a deep voice, "I am Qing Qian, a disciple of the Kaiyang Peak Inner Gate of the Holy Yuan sect." "Who?" Su Jianqing looked bewildered. Xingyuan sect is one of the 10 sects in Xianshan, with rankings fluctuating back and forth between the second and third. The 10 immortals of the Immortal Mountains are also a large number, and this big character is not only reflected in strength and resource reserves, but also in population size. The sect has a total of 9 main peaks, 120.8 small peaks, with each peak having as many as 1 or 200 people and as few as 40 or 50 people, as well as tens of thousands of disciples from other sections. Su Jianqing, a little transparent person who has been waiting in the outer gate since he started, has not even recognized the tens of thousands of disciples in the outer gate, let alone the inner gate disciples who cannot be hit with 8 sticks. However, Kaiyang Peak seems to be one of the 9 main peaks, with a focus on physical cultivation. Thank you all for the monthly tickets. It's an honor to have a great liking for the new article. I will work hard to write it well. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Finding Fault. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Finding Fault. Looking at Qing Qian's physique, with a large arms and a round waist, it is indeed an individual cultivation. But what does this have to do with oneself? Out of courtesy, Su Jianqing thought carefully and confirmed that he had never had any interaction with Qing Qian, and he didn't know where his hostility towards him came from. Su Jianqing said, "It seems that senior brother Cheng has objections to me. Have I ever offended you?" Qing Qian snorted from his nose and sneered, offending me. You haven't offended me personally, but what you've done is enough for everyone to shout. Su Jianqing frowned and said, what did I do? Qing Qian saw that she was stubborn and restless, and immediately became furious. What did you say you did? If you hadn't done anything, could you still stand here? Su Jianqing let out a recalling her life for the first 14 years of this life. Before the age of 10, Su Jianqing was dependent on his mother, the Su family, and even followed her surname. She didn't know she had a father until she was 10 years old when Su was critically ill. Before her death, she told her that she had a father from Xianshan and gave her a Qianquan bag to go to Xianshan to find her relatives. Xianshan, that is the world of cultivators. A cultivator, a group of people closest to the sky. The 10-year-old child went alone to Xianshan to search for his family, and the hardships he suffered during the journey can be imagined, but Su Jianqing endured them all one by one. It was simply because she had expectations in her heart, which reached their peak when she finally found the Holy Yuan sect, but then dropped to the lowest point when she met the so-called biological father. Chu Gufeng, who is already an elder of the Xingyuan sect, has a new Taoist couple and daughter. The Taoist couple was his childhood sweetheart's junior sister Lu Rujing, and his daughter was named Chu Qinyao. She was 9 years old at the time, and at the age of 6, she had detected a single type of water spirit root. She had become her youngest true disciple under the guidance of Master Jin of Yaoguang Peak. And she was just an accident after Elder Chu suffered a serious injury and lost his memory. If it weren't for Su Jianqing's appearance, the family would be happy and sweet. But Su Jianqing happened to appear, still a useless member of the 5 spirit roots. He didn't even have the need to cultivate him, but he couldn't drive him out of the sect. So he had to hold his nose and recognize him, and then drive him far away to become a disciple of the sect. Life and death are on his own. There is no difference between having a father like this and not having one. If there is no father like this, then there is no such thing. Su Jianqing comforted himself with this, knowing that his qualifications would not be able to advance to the inner door in his lifetime. He decided to come and learn some cultivation methods before finding an opportunity to go down the mountain and spend his days freely. Unexpectedly, her father did not recognize her, while Chu Qinyao was full of enthusiasm and care for herself. From time to time, she would come to see herself with food and utensils, calling her sister one by one. Su Jianqing felt that it was okay if her father didn't want her. With an additional sister, at least he could still feel a hint of warmth belonging to his family. The good times didn't last long, and I don't know where the source came from. Rumors spread among the disciples of the outer sect, saying that her mother shamelessly seduced Elder Chu in the past, and now she has appeared to deceive her innocent half-sister. Su Jianqing knew that those were not facts, but he had no way to argue and could only weakly spread rumors. Therefore, several external disciples who were only familiar with her before also distanced themselves from her. Gradually, in everyone's eyes, Su Jianqing was seen as a scheming but incompetent waste, while Chu Qinyao became an innocent and deceitful group pet junior sister. Su Jianqing bears everything alone, never realizing that it was all designed by Chu Qinyao and her mother. Until 2 years ago, at the arena of the sect disciple Dabai, Su Jianqing wielded a spiritual sword gifted by Chu Qinyao himself and swung a sword that did not match his own strength and was comparable to that of a foundation-building cultivator, knocking Chu Qinyao off the stage and causing him to vomit blood and suffer serious injuries. The 4-year layout will be completed on this day. Unscrupulous schemes and harm fellow disciples. Su Jianqing argued irrefutably and remained silent waiting. Then she was taken to her own prison and walked through it. Su Jianqing, who was injured all over, was thrown into the deserted city until now. Previously, Su Jianqing never dared to recall this scene, but now looking back, it's nothing. Faced with Qing Qian's questioning, she said calmly, "Don't say that I haven't done anything before, even if I have really done something, it will be paid off when I come back here after passing through the prison." I don't know what Fang Daoyu meant today. Qing Qian became even angrier when he saw her seemingly unrepentant and righteous, and said, "Did what you did in the prison disappear? Do you know how your junior sister escaped death after that sword strike and still has an old illness to this day?" "I don't know, it's none of my business." Su Jianqing's expression remained unchanged. She can still remember the day when Chu Qinyao went to the prison to see her with her severely injured body. She thought the other party was caring and full of guilt, but she didn't expect Chu Qinyao to wear the same innocent smile as usual, and reveal the most sinister words in the world between her lips. "Waste, do you really want to be my sister? You deserve it too. Why didn't you go to die with your short-lived mother? Unfortunately, you even asked me to find you. You know that when you appeared, the heart demon that easily dispelled your father arose again, almost causing him to go crazy. Why didn't you go to die? Why didn't you go to die on your own? Why did you ask me to give you a ride? Is there anything else Su Jianqing doesn't understand?" After seeing Chu Qinyao, her emotions went from excitement, injustice, guilt to shock, silence, and despair, and this process only took half a quarter of an hour. She has a grievance, but there is nowhere to complain about it, and no one will believe her. There is no need to think too much about who one believes in the words of a sect genius and an outsider waste. Su Jianqing thought he would be tortured to death, or imprisoned for life, but he didn't want to end up in a deserted city. "I even thought about leaving like this, and from now on, I will stay away from the Holy Yuan sect and become the Qing dynasty." If Su Jianqing looks back now, he will only feel that his ideas are too young and wishful thinking. Chu Qinyao really wants her to die. The present Qing Qian is the best proof. But she is no longer the same person as yesterday. Qing Qian was furious, raised his hand and slapped it with the wind, causing everyone present to be surprised. Qing Qian is a cultivator of the golden core, and even an ordinary palm is not something that ordinary people can afford. Based on Qing Qian's understanding of Su Jianqing, her talent in the 5 spirit roots was only 1 layer of qi cultivation when she went out. Now, 2 years have passed, and even if she works hard, she can only practice 2 or 3 layers of qi. What is the difference between her and ordinary people? But Qing Qian had no intention of stopping. He didn't hesitate to vent his anger on his junior sister, so he was naturally prepared. If a useless disciple who made a mistake is really killed, the sect will at most punish him without any pain or itching. He cultivates alone, and the prison system is really difficult. It's just a passing act. Qing Qian is really thoughtful, thinking that this palm of Su's star avoidance is unavoidable and will inevitably suffer a great loss. Unexpectedly, Su Jianqing did not dodge, but suddenly moved when the palm wind approached. I saw her leisurely extending her right hand, her 5 fingers clasped together into a palm, and gently pushing it out against Qing Qian's palm wind. The onlookers were all surprised, and no one felt that Su Jianqing could withstand Qing Qian's palm with force. Some even averted their gaze, unwilling to see the girl's tragic death under the guidance of the golden core cultivator. Ah! After facing each other, a painful scream echoed through the entire hall, lingering for a long time. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Anti-Killing. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Anti-Killing. With the heart-wrenching screams, a figure was thrown backwards in an arc, which first hit the wall and then fell heavily to the ground. The voice suddenly stopped and there was no movement for a while. The onlookers inside and outside focused their gaze on Su Jianqing, who was standing steadily, in silence. Undoubtedly, since it wasn't Su Jianqing who just fell out, only Qing Qian was there. But everyone didn't dare to believe what their eyes saw. Isn't it qi training that can beat the streets when facing the golden pill? It's unbelievable. What's even more outrageous is that the golden elixir was knocked away. Su Jianqing didn't pay much attention to the crowd's gaze, nor did he take a more humble look, as if he was completely unaware of what kind of big thing he had just done. He clapped his hands, bent down, and put the things on the ground back into his qianquan bag, soaring away. Arrogant, too arrogant. I don't know how long it took, but Qingqian finally got up from the ground. At this point, the hall was completely empty. He is actually a cultivator of the golden elixir. He lost such a big face in front of many people for a while. Although Su Jianqing had already stabilized his hatred, it is also difficult to guarantee that he will not vent his anger on the people present. The wise took advantage of Qingqian's lack of consciousness and naturally ran away. Qingqian felt pain all over his body, especially the arm he was holding onto, which was now soft and hanging down. Even without looking inside, he knew that the bones inside must have been broken. He was too confident and contemptuous to see that Su Jianqing had already built a foundation in just 2 years, but even so, he shouldn't have suffered such a big loss. Building a foundation and using the golden elixir is a significant gap, and the combat power value of this gap cannot be easily overcome. But Su Jianqing did it. Qingqian covered his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood. He looked down at the broken teeth mixed in the blood, and his hatred toward Su Jianqing deepened. Su Jianqing, I will definitely make you pay the price. As soon as they finished speaking, 2 people walked into the door, one in front of the other. Walking ahead was a man in a blue robe, with a plain appearance. His hair was tied up in a mixed yuan bun with a black jade hairpin on top of his head, and his wide sleeves swayed gently as he walked, creating a relaxed and carefree atmosphere. The man behind him had a jade-faced golden crown, dressed in a gorgeous purple brocade robe, with a jade belt around his waist. He held a jade flute and gently patted the other palm. "Oh, what's going on here?" The purple-robed man looked around and chuckled, asking casually. Qingqian was about to speak, but he felt a darkness in front of him. It turned out that the man in the green robe had quietly come to him at some point, bent down, and immediately picked up something from the ground. Qingqian's face stiffened as he thought the other party was coming to examine his injuries, but his pupils shrank when he saw what the other party was holding. That is a photo pearl that Qingqian was originally planning to record the scene of humiliating Su Jianqing and bring it back to please his junior sister. "Gao Yu." Qingqian called out to the man in the green robe and met his calm gaze. For some reason, he felt a little dry-mouthed and instinctively swallowed a mouthful of saliva. "That's my thing. I hope Gao Yu can return it." "Return it." The purple-robed man approached and glanced at the shadow bead, sneering. "On the first day of taking office, he asked me to face this house full of chaos. These are all assets of the Immortal Alliance. If I'm not sure what happened, wouldn't it be possible for me to pay for them out of my own pocket? This shadow bead has traces of residual magic, looks new, and there must be clues inside. I kept it until I found the culprit." Since the 2 of them entered the door, Qingqian knew he couldn't afford to provoke them, but when he heard the tone and attitude of the purple-robed man speaking, he thought of the head of the garrison in the wasteland, who was supposed to be in place half a month ago but has yet to be seen. He acted arrogantly for this reason. But now, a sense of foreboding surged in Qingqian's heart, and he hesitated and asked, "May I ask your 2 fellow Taoists who they are?" The man in the purple robe chuckled and shattered Qingqian's last illusion. "I will stop the wind below, and the new head and lord of the Xianmeng wasteland city will be stationed." "Done." Qingqian's face turned pale. On the other hand, Su Jianqing walked out of the Immortal Alliance exchange point and quickly went to the Wanjin Pavilion in the city. That is a shop specializing in selling various natural materials, treasures, magic weapons, and spiritual tools. The price of receiving goods is even slightly higher than that of Xianmeng, and many treasure pickers in the city ship here. As soon as I stepped into Wanjin Pavilion, I was immediately greeted by a runner with a smiling face and asked, "Sir, should we ship or take a look?" Su Jianqing thought for a moment and said, "You can both ship and take a look at it casually." He then asked, "Do you have any spiritual swords suitable for beginners here?" The smile on his face deepened as he ran to the hall. He invited Su Jianqing in and said, "Of course there is. My guest, it's a coincidence. A few days ago, our boss opened a sword room on the 2nd floor of our building, and all the swords in it were made by the masters of the Tiangong sect. Su Jianqing nodded. Tiangong Gate, Miaosho Gate, and Xin Gate all belong to the top 10 immortal sects, but they all rank lower. If we delve deeper into their causes, there are only two words. Partial science. Not only is it biased towards science, but there are also fewer people. Even so, the Heavenly Craft sect is still renowned and unparalleled. There are a group of alchemists within the sect, and all the treasures produced by the Heavenly Craft sect are constantly ingenious and of first-class quality, surpassing any other treasures of the same level. It can be said that in the entire cultivation world, only the treasures produced by the Heavenly Craft sect can be compared to those produced by the Heavenly Craft sect. Sir, do you want to go and take a look? Run Tang asked with a smile on the side. Su Jianqing. No. Let's ship it out first. It's not that I'm not unmotivated, I just don't dare to move. Because the three characters Tiangongmen represent the roaring spirit stones. At this moment, what Su Jianqing lacks the most is spirit stones. Upon hearing this answer, the runner's smile remained unchanged, his toes turned, and he led Su Jianqing directly to the receiving area. Half an hour later, Su Jianqing walked out of Wanjin Pavilion with a smile on his face. The full supplies in the Qianquan bag have all been replaced with spirit stones, which is enough for little Ayu to practice for a while. Before coming out, she didn't give up and took a look at the sword room on the second floor. Sure enough, they were all good swords, but they were also very expensive. The spiritual stone we received from the shipment is not even a fraction of a sword. It seems that if you want to find a successful sword for Xiao Ayu, you can only think of another one. Seeing that it was getting late, Su Jianqing took a step towards home. As he passed by a mansion with Duan Fu hanging on it, he saw a group of people at the entrance trying to work together to lift a thick and long tree trunk onto a cart. Su Jianqing, who had not paid much attention to it, suddenly saw the traces on the tree body as he passed by. His gaze immediately froze and his footsteps stopped. She saw an old man dressed in wealthy attire at the door, who should be the owner's family, and went over to ask, "Uncle, is this tree not wanted by the owner of your mansion?" The old man surnamed Duan, who was the owner of the Duan mansion, exclaimed upon hearing Su Jianqing's question, "Isn't that right? A few days ago, in the middle of the night, a thunderbolt came from somewhere and broke down this century-old peach tree in my house. It even caused a sky fire and almost ran into the water. Fortunately, the night patrol guards were alert, and they were busy extinguishing the water. However, this peach tree was struck by lightning and could not survive. Today, the tide of monsters receded, so I had someone drag the tree out and deal with it." Su Jianqing's heart sank and he said, "Since you don't want this tree, why don't I buy it? It saves you having to work so many people. If you like it, please support me and vote for recommendations. Your support is my motivation." End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Dead Trees. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Dead Trees. Upon hearing this, Mr. Duan looked at Su Jianqing in surprise and hesitated. "What do you want this useless dead tree for, Mississippi?" Su Jianqing said, "This tree is thick enough to be used as firewood for a long time, and peach wood can ward off evil spirits. I see that there is still an intact part in the middle that can be dug out for my sister to cut into a wooden sword, and a few wooden hairpins can be made with me, which is more than enough to save me from spending money on the street again." Duan Lao saw that Su Jianqing was dressed in ordinary clothes, so he thought it was because his family was struggling, so he carefully planned. Seeing that she was still young, and thinking about her sister in her words, it seems that life has not been easy. After a moment of contemplation, he nodded and said, "Anyway, it's something the master doesn't want. If you want it, I'll give it to you. Where does your family live? If it's in the city, I'll have my servants deliver it directly to you." Su Jianqing shook his head and refused Duan Lao's kindness. After thinking for a moment, he said, "Thank you very much, my father. Since my father. Doesn't want money, I will make a promise. If there are any problems in your mansion in the future, as long as it is reasonable, I will definitely help you once. She said this with a hint of hesitation before speaking, but when she spoke it out, she was also candid, as if her first help was remarkable. But ultimately, they are young people with high spirits, so let's just listen to these words. Duan Lao smiled nonchalantly and asked, since the girl doesn't need my servants to send her away, how do you plan to transport this tree? Su Jianqing looked around and saw one of the people who were working together to lift the tree, dressed in a courtyard guard with a long sword pinned to his waist. He asked, can I borrow that big brother's long sword for a while? Duan Lao Hua let out a surprise and said, I can't tell that the girl is still a practitioner. Su Jianqing smiled and remained silent. Duan Lao asked the guard to release the long sword and hand it to Su Jianqing. As soon as Su Jianqing picked up the sword, he knew that it was not bad in the mortal world. It was forged with top-quality steel and cut iron like mud. No wonder the guard was reluctant when he released the sword just now. You. Be careful. The guard saw Su Jianqing carrying his sword to the peach tree, and after all, he still cautioned anxiously. Su Jianqing smiled and said, don't worry, if it's used up, I'll compensate you even better. After saying that, he looked around at the crowd of people and said, swords have no eyes. Please spread out a bit. Everyone was curious about how this young girl would use her sword. Although she had spread out a bit, she refused to take any extra steps. Su Jianqing felt a bit helpless, but didn't say anything more. He casually held a sword flower and danced a few times before sheathing the long sword. Is this finished? None of the people could understand, only wondering if this little girl was just trying to touch her sword to be so mysterious. Anyway, she was very unhappy in her heart. Duan Lao was also confused. He opened his mouth and wanted to ask something, but suddenly someone exclaimed in shock, split, split. Following the sound, the speaker reached out and pointed to a fallen trunk on the ground. That is the part of the peach tree near the branches, slightly suspended. After being cut off, it naturally falls under the hanging force, making it clear to people. As everyone approached, they saw that the incision was smooth and fresh, and it was indeed the result of Su Jianqing's few swords just now. Upon closer inspection, this incision was made in more than 10 places on the entire peach tree, dividing it into even sections. Everyone looked at Su Jianqing again with a hint of respect in their eyes. Duan Lao held his hand and arched, I didn't expect the girl to be so powerful. Ordinary. Su Jianqing humbly spoke, but quickly put the evenly divided peach tree into the qiankuan bag in his hand. Is there anything that Duan Lao doesn't understand at this moment? This is encountering a cultivator. There are many cultivators in this city, but few have any interaction with mortals. His eyes flashed with a hint of caution and he asked, do you dare to ask the Immortal Master what he said earlier, that if there is something in my mansion, I will definitely help you once? Is this still true? Su Jianqing said, it's natural to make numbers. Is it because my father-in-law is facing difficulties now? Duan Lao waved his hand awkwardly and said, this is not true. While cultivators have a long lifespan, I am already a person who has half a foot in the coffin. If the Immortal Master's promise can be passed on to my descendants, how can I seek help from the Immortal Master in the future? This kind of question is not a problem for Su Jianqing either. She originally planned to go home first and prepare to talk about it tomorrow, but now that someone has raised it, this is easy to handle. Su Jianqing took out a dark peach tree branch from the qiankuan bag and threw it into the air, while also raising the long sword that had not yet been returned. Her movements were too fast, and everyone saw the sword's shadow swiftly passing by. When the peach branch fell into Su Jianqing's hand from the air, it had already been cut into a wooden hairpin and handed over to Mr. Duan. Let's use this hairpin as a token. Peachwood warding off evil, I have carved a simple formation that can withstand a cultivator's blow. Duan Lao trembled slightly as he took the wooden hairpin. At first glance, the entire hairpin was exceptionally round. If I hadn't just witnessed Su Jianqing's movements with my own eyes, how could I have imagined that such a smooth and flat hairpin body would have been cut from a long sword within a few breaths, rather than the result of careful polishing and polishing. The style of the wooden hairpin is not very innovative, with one end slightly large and round, and the other end slightly pointed. However, if you look closely, you can find that there are incomprehensible marks on the depth of this hairpin, which is probably the formation that Su Jianqing said. After this incident, Su Jianqing and the old man said goodbye and went home without any delay. As soon as I opened the door, I saw you standing angrily with her hands crossed over her waist at the door. Su Jianqing was startled and said, "Xiao Aiyu, what are you doing here? Where have you been, Su Jianqing?" Aiyu saw the person and immediately blushed. She opened her hand and threw herself into Su Jianqing's arms, crying loudly. Su Jianqing stroked her small head and asked, "Why are you crying? Did someone bully me when I wasn't at home?" Aiyu shook her head. "No, that's good." Su Jianqing didn't ask any more questions and stood still, when Aiyu hugged and cried for a while. When she stopped crying and started sniffling, she pulled her up and walked into the room, gave her some water, twisted her handkerchief, and wiped her face. "Alright, now let's talk about what's going on." Aiyu sobbed and said, I thought you had an accident again." It's no wonder Su Jianqing realized how much psychological shadow he had caused this little girl to fall into the monster tide before. But cultivating immortality is a matter of defying the heavens, even if no one is framing it from the side. The road is also full of thorns, and there are too many chances of dying. But now I can't explain it to the little girl, so I can only put it aside for now. She said, "I saw you practicing earlier and thought that the treasure-picking items hadn't been changed yet, so I went out for a trip." Aiyu also knew that she was a false alarm and felt a bit embarrassed. "Next time, you should tell me not to run away on your own." Su Jianqing promised, "Before you can protect yourself, even if I go out, I won't go too far." He then took out the storage bag he had just bought while redeeming spirit stones at the treasure pavilion and handed it to Aiyu. "What is this?" Aiyu took it over and looked at the plain purse-like storage bag with a puzzled expression on her face. Su Jianqing guided her to explore her divine sense into it. Aiyu noticed the Qinkuan in it and her eyes lit up. "Is this the same as your Qinkuan bag?" "Yes." "So, is this for me?" Aiyu was not quite sure, her eyes sparkling as she looked at Su Jianqing. Su Jianqing nodded and said, "Of course it's for you." "Thank you, Star Sister." Aiyu excitedly ran around the yard holding the storage bag. Children's joys and sorrows always come and go so quickly. Su Jianqing sat in the corridor, looking at the small figures enjoying themselves all over the yard, and a smile unconsciously appeared on the corner of his mouth. If you like it, please vote more and support more. Thank you. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Seeing Demons. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Seeing Demons. Hot congee is bubbling in the pot. The rich aroma of rice soup permeates the air throughout the entire room. Su Jianqing looked at the sky, put out the fire in the stove, and heated congee with only the residual heat of the charcoal fire. She has built Jeepy Valley, but Ayu has not yet. This congee is also prepared for Ayu. They live in a single courtyard. The yard is not small, it was left by Grandpa Ayu before his death. Her grandfather is a highly skilled doctor, and when he was in the yard, he was constantly sunbathing with herbs. Now that the person is gone, Ayu has not been able to inherit her grandfather's mantle, and the yard is gradually becoming empty. Su Jianqing walked into the yard and poured out all the peach tree sections from the Qinkuan bag, laying it ground. Then he bent down and picked up a piece with his hand. Quickly, she picked out one of the relatively small tree segments and nodded in satisfaction. Peachwood belongs to Yang, and it has the ability to ward off evil and clear the heart. If 100-year-old peach wood is struck by lightning again and undergoes a qualitative transformation, it will become 100-year-old lightning-struck wood. Even if placed in the cultivation world, it is still a high-quality material for refining weapons. The selected tree segment is exactly lightning-struck wood. From the outside, this piece of wood looks no different from the other pieces, but if you compare them all, you will find that this section of the tree is much heavier in weight than the others. Su Jianqing raised his hand as a sword, transforming his spiritual energy into sword energy and swiftly swiping it across the ground. The lightning-struck wood was neatly split into several pieces. From the cross-dot section, the wood is covered with black wood grain, and in some places it is even completely burnt black. On the contrary, the wood color is displayed in the form of grain. Leave 2 copies and prepare to put the remaining wood back into the Qianquan bag. A spiritual light suddenly flew out of a tree segment and fled outward. The spiritual light was very fast, but Su Jianqing's speed was even faster. As her 5 fingers opened and closed in the void, a spiritual net silently appeared on the escape route of the spiritual light, tying it straight. With a flick of his finger, the spiritual net wrapped in spiritual light fell into Su Jianqing's hand. She lowered her head and looked carefully. That group of spiritual light with a white tint of powder seemed indistinguishable at first glance. Even if it fell into Su Jianqing's hands, it still struggled tirelessly, attempting to escape. Immediately, Su Jianqing closed his eyes to look at the sky. Under the sky's gaze, the power of immortals was fully displayed. The originally clear sky was instantly surrounded by dark clouds, and the dark clouds made a dull sound. Lightning flickered incessantly above the clouds, as if waiting for a wild wilderness belonging to thunder. Su Jianqing seemed to feel something and instantly opened his eyes. The power of immortals immediately dissipated. Only layers of dark clouds in the sky dispersed in confusion due to losing focus. At the same time, the green-robed man in the mansion of the lord of the deserted city opened his eyes while practicing, and his body disappeared in a flash in place. Ji Feng also felt something, but his reaction was not as strong. He opened his mouth and said, "Tai Chen." He choked up in his throat before he could spit it out before he saw the man in the green robe disappear from his sight. On the other hand, Su Jianqing stroked his forehead, feeling a little speechless in his heart. She also just realized that she was a direct reincarnation of a fairy soul. It should be noted that there are differences between immortals and mortals. The circulation of worldly affairs in the mortal world has its own set of rules, among which the one related to immortals is to prohibit them from descending to the mortal world without permission, and the mortal rules suppress the cultivation of immortals, making them unable to exert their strength above the Mahayana realm. So far, a fairy with a fairy-like aura walking in the mortal world is like a piece of flesh that reminds everyone of its pungent aura. Everyone wants to take a bite, and the result is unimaginable. So generally, if immortals have any unfinished matters in the mortal world, they can either pass on the immortal edicts through the sex formation to the younger generation of the sect to handle them, or they can split out a few strands of divine consciousness to incarnate and descend to the mortal world. She can also be considered to have descended to the mortal world in her true form, but she has returned to the path of enlightenment and her cultivation is still shallow, so weak that she is no different from ants. If exposed, just thinking about it makes me shudder. Su Jianqing. Su Jianqing is a bit tempted to curse. Fortunately, this is a remote and desolate city, even though there are experts, it has not yet reached the point of being able to sense immortality. Even if someone has a strange celestial phenomenon, they can still be regarded as someone who suppresses cultivation and avoids heavenly calamity. Right. Su Jianqing immediately blocked the immortal consciousness, but naturally did not notice the quiet young man Taichen standing outside her house. However, at that moment, she had already seen clearly that the spiritual light was actually the soul of a flower demon that was about to condense. The change in the classic prescription made the soul of the flower demon even weaker. After a moment of contemplation, Su Jianqing's palm, holding the flower demon soul, emitted a layer of green with spirit energy, which injected into the demon soul. After about half an hour, a thin layer of sweat seeped from her forehead, and the spirit of the flower demon finally solidified a little. Su Jianqing's palm relaxed, and the spiritual net that bound the soul of the flower demon disappeared. The flower demon's spiritual light leaped and fell to the ground, transforming into a beautiful woman. She bowed to Su Jianqing and said, "Thank you very much for the help of the immortal master, who saved the little demon from death and thunder. The little demon is willing to be a cow and horse to repay the immortal master's life-saving kindness." It turns out that the essence of this flower demon is that century-old peach tree. For peach trees, 100 years is not considered longevity, and at most, they can only give birth to some spiritual intelligence. In terms of intelligence, it is almost the same as that of naive children, and there are many limitations. But the night before yesterday was unusual. Before the thunder fell, the moonlight filled the sky, and the emperor's plasma flowed down to the world. Emperor Lu Jiang, this object is transformed by the moonlight. It can be obtained by plants and trees in the mortal world to become a demon, and it can be possessed by demons, ghosts, and monsters to display divine powers. But if there are no gains from plants and monsters, they will disappear without entering the ground. The peach blossom demon had just given birth to some spiritual intelligence, but for some reason, he had acquired the emperor's fluid. His mind suddenly opened up and he became a demon. Before he could be happy, he was struck by the heavenly thunder, and half of his 3 souls and 7 souls were scattered. If he were allowed to be burned by the heavenly fire, the remaining half would also be scattered. Fortunately, the owner of that house quickly extinguished the fire, so the peach blossom demon had to keep the half-weak soul that was almost imperceptible and retreat into its body for warmth and nourishment. Unexpectedly, the owner of the house thought that the thunder had killed the peach tree and quickly dug out the entire tree, ready to throw it away. He happened to encounter Su Jianqing passing by. This luck, even the peach blossom demon herself couldn't distinguish between good and bad, so she naturally didn't dare to suddenly show her weakness in front of Su Jianqing. She just wanted to take advantage of it and drag her remaining soul away. Unexpectedly, he was caught again. Fortunately, Su Jianqing was not the person who waited to cultivate the spirit of demons and monsters. He also transported the qi of the wood spirit to keep it alive. Thinking about the brief terrifying pressure before, the peach blossom demon didn't understand what it was, but knew that if it didn't hold its thighs tightly at this moment, even if the other party let it go outside, it wouldn't live long. The peach blossom demon dared not conceal it, and in just a few words, he explained his origins and lowered his head, looking as if he was being dealt with by the Lord. Su Jianqing really doesn't have a hobby of cultivating demons and spirits, and he can't judge the luck of this peach blossom demon. She looked at the obedient and gentle peach blossom demon in front of her, without much joy, but with a few more thorny feelings. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Zhen. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Zhen. Su Jianqing remained silent for a moment and reached out to take a section of a tree with roots and whiskers. Half of the section of the tree was scorched black by lightning, and the exposed section of the other half still had a fresh smell of wood. His gaze wandered around the yard and spotted a spot against the wall. Su Jianqing walked over and dug a large pit, first taking a few spirit stones and placing them in the pit. The arrangement of spirit stones seems casual and lacks any structure. Then, Su Jianqing threw the selected tree root into the pit, pinched the formula with his left hand, and a spiritual light flew out of his fingertips and fell into the tree root. Almost instantly, with the tree root as the center, the light of the spiritual stone in the pit surged and quickly dimmed. However, if you look closely, you can find that a spiritual formation has formed between the spiritual stone and the tree root, in which the spiritual energy flows faintly and endlessly. Su Jianqing buried the soil and turned his face to look at the peach blossom demon who had been following him all along. He said, "It's not broken, it's not standing. You used the Emperor's fluid to open up spiritual and divine powers to achieve the demon body. Although you scattered most of your life opportunities in the face of thunder, it doesn't seem like a disaster now. Your body has changed from an ordinary peach tree to a lightning-struck wood, with only half of your vitality left. As long as you rest well, it's not impossible to return. The peach tree, as the essence of the peach blossom demon, has a strong connection with it. Just now, Su Jianqing felt the movement of the soul-gathering and soul-nourishing formation, which was set up with its body as its eye. Immediately bowing to the ground and bowing in gratitude, he said, "The immortal master has shown great kindness, and the little demon has nothing to thank." Su Jianqing said, "You don't need to thank me. I have taken most of the lightning strike wood that your body has made, which can be considered as a clearing." Unexpectedly, the peach blossom demon believed that without the help of Su Jianqing, it would not be able to survive for too long without that little bit of vitality. Therefore, Su Jianqing's actions to it were nothing but the kindness of rebirth, not something that could be repaid by a mere lack of vitality. The newborn peach blossom demon has a simple personality, but is born as a demon with a naturally stubborn nature. Su Jianqing had no intention of getting into too much trouble about this matter. After thinking about it, she took a small piece of tree branch and cut it into a wooden hairpin, then casually carved several formations. Then she inserted the wooden hairpin into the hair of the peach blossom demon and said, "You should practice well. I promised the Duan mansion before, and since you and the Duan mansion have 100 years of nurturing, it can be considered a predestined relationship. Now I think this promise is mostly for you to fulfill. Are you willing?" The peach blossom demon wearing a wooden hairpin not only solidifies its body but also allows it to walk freely in the daytime without fear of sunlight. The peach blossom demon was overjoyed and readily agreed. He nodded and said, "Master Xian, rest assured that the little demon will practice well. When the Duan mansion finds him in the future, I will fulfill this promise and ensure that it is done properly. I won't ask the immortal master to put in any extra effort." Seeing that although it had transformed into a woman's appearance, its every move and gesture had no feminine charm. Instead, it pounded its chest with a bang-bang sound. Su Jianqing's eyebrows jumped and he said, "I remember the peach tree has no distinction between male and female. Why did you transform into a woman?" The peach blossom demon shyly lowered her head and said, "I see that the immortal master is extraordinary, and I also want to become a person like him one day. So, I will transform myself into an immortal master." After speaking, she looked at herself and curiously asked, "Do immortal masters not like him?" Su Jianqing looked at her undulating chest and then lowered his head to look at himself. "Ah bah! Can there be such a big difference compared to the difference in shape?" Angry. Anyway, the peach blossom demon can be considered to have fallen for Su Jianqing. When Ayu woke up in the morning, she found a beautiful little sister at home. She didn't know what had happened yet. At first, she was a bit cautious, but after learning about the origin of the peach blossom demon, she saw that although it was beautiful, it had a good temper and a gentle personality. She quickly played with it. The hot congee on the pot was already cooked, and Ayu took the peach blossom demon to pancake. One person, one demon, one teaching and one learning, the atmosphere is harmonious. After a while, the hot song yubing will be baked, and the air will smell delicious. Ayu and the pastor held a piece of hot song yubing, took a bite, and then took a hot congee. Yes, just a while ago, Ayu had already named the peach blossom demon Zhen. From the line in Peach Blossom. Peach blossom is young and tender, with its leaves growing strong. From then on, the peach blossom demon also had its own name. The inside of the door was filled with joy and peace, and the figure of the blue-robed man who had stood still outside for a long time disappeared at some point. Su Jianqing was completely unaware of all of this. At this moment, she was already sitting on the cattail inside the house, holding two prepared lightning strike logs in her hand, intending to start refining. These two pieces of wood are the most essence of that piece of wood. Su Jianqing also plans to use them to refine two swords. After careful consideration in her heart, she no longer procrastinated. She reached out and her palms quickly filled with spiritual energy. Her palms circled in the air a few times, and soon a spherical empty heart furnace was made. Then Su Jianxing threw 2 pieces of wood into the spirit furnace, and then ignited Dan fire to cover the entire spirit furnace, slowly calcining it. From dawn to sunset, the wood is burned in the spirit furnace to remove impurities, continuously refined, and its radiance becomes more and more brilliant. Just as the last ray of sunset was left, the elixir fire went out, but the light in the spirit furnace had reached its limit. At this moment, Su Jianxing, who had been sitting as still as a bell, suddenly moved and quickly imprinted his hands in the air, so fast that it was difficult to see clearly. He struggled to catch a glimpse of a few remnants on one side. As she laid down each seal, the light in the spirit furnace gradually dimmed, until the last seal fell. The spirit furnace shattered with a loud bang, and 2 small swords rushed out of it. They spun around the room happily twice, and finally obediently landed in Su Jianxing's outstretched palm. "It's pretty good." She pushed out the door with 2 swords in hand. Aiyu and Zhen, who were squatting outside, immediately lit up their eyes when they saw her come out. Aiyu suddenly stood up, but her legs were numb from squatting for too long. Before she could stand firm, she twisted her teeth and fell back. Fortunately, Zhen helped her, which prevented her from falling firmly. Su Jianxing looked a bit amused and walked over with his hands behind his back, asking, "Why are we all waiting here?" Aiyu's legs were numb and unable to speak, so she could only look at Zhen and ask her to answer. Zhen respectfully said, "It was me and Aiyu who saw the occasional surge of spiritual light in the Immortal Master's house. We thought it was a treasure being worshipped and refined, so we wanted to guard here to prevent the little ones from trespassing." After speaking, she still looked nervously at Su Jianxing, as if waiting for her. Su Jianxing looked at Aiyu, then at Zhen, and nodded for a while before saying, "You have a heart." Zhen showed a shy and joyful smile, much like a child praised by elders. Su Jianxing. At this moment, Aiyu's legs finally healed. She squeezed over and asked rudely, "Sister Star, what are you doing? Take it out and take a look." Su Jianxing knocked on her little head and said, "Sister Xingxing, if you have something to do, Su Jianxing. Little Aiyu, you have such a great ability to change your face." Aiyu rubbed her brain and gave a hee smile, firmly bringing the topic back and saying, "Let me see." Su Jianxing had no intention of hiding it, just teasing her. Seeing her persistently asking, she simply took out her hand behind her and spread it out. End of this chapter.